A millionaire who regained his sight sees his fiancée for the first time on their wedding day and is shocked by what he sees. Before we dive into the story, leave a comment below and let us know which city you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Lucas's heart was pounding so fast it felt like it might leap out of his chest. His hands were trembling. This wasn't just any wedding. This was the moment when his life, shattered 2 years ago, would finally regain meaning. The memory of the accident haunted him like a ghost. He could still picture himself driving that night, listening to his favorite song on the radio, until the sound of screeching tires and the deafening crash threw him into darkness. Everything disappeared. The light, the music, the life he had known. Blindness had plunged him into an abyss that seemed impossible to escape. But then came Clara. Lucas took a deep breath as he thought of her. Clara wasn't just the woman who helped him relearn how to live. She was his light in the darkness. She made him believe again, not just in love, but in himself. And now, here he was, standing at the altar, about to marry the woman who had brought meaning back to his life. The sound of her footsteps echoed down the aisle. The murmurs of the guests faded, and Lucas held his breath. He tried to imagine Clara, as he had done so many times before. The white dress, the smile that could light up any room. But tonight, something was different. A glimmer. Lucas blinked, feeling something pierce the darkness that had consumed him for so long. It was small, like a spark, but it was real. He tried to ignore it, thinking it was just his imagination. But then it happened again, stronger this time. He blinked again, confused, his heart racing even faster. It couldn't be. It wasn't possible. Another flash, and then a blurry white silhouette began to take shape, vague and undefined, but undeniably there. Lucas froze. With each step Clara took, the image grew sharper. He could see the outline of her dress, the graceful movements, and finally, as she came closer, her face began to come into focus. It was as if the world was coming back to life before his eyes. Tears streamed down his face. Then came the shock. He hadn't known what to expect, but the woman before him was even more beautiful than he had imagined. Her eyes shone with a love so pure, and her smile, Lucas felt a tightness in his chest. He couldn't believe it. Clara stopped in front of him, sensing something had changed. "Lucas?" she whispered, confused as he stared at her, unable to look away. With a trembling voice he murmured, overwhelmed, "Clara, I can see you." Her expression shifted from surprise to pure emotion. Tears filled her eyes as Lucas allowed himself to take in every detail. She was more than he had ever dreamed of. In that moment, he realized that not only had his vision returned, but a new chapter in his life was beginning. 2 years before the day that would change his life again, Lucas had been a rising star. Known as one of the most talented pianists of his generation, he lived for sold-out concerts and roaring applause. That night, he had left an ecstatic audience after what he considered one of his finest performances. He still felt the adrenaline as he got into his car, ready to drive back to his apartment. Soft classical music played on the radio, echoing the notes he had just performed with mastery. But as he sped down the dimly lit streets, a blinding light suddenly crossed his path. In mere seconds, everything changed. The sound of screeching tires, the violent impact, and then silence. When Lucas opened his eyes, all he saw was darkness. The following days were a haze of confusion and despair. At the hospital, the doctors explained that the trauma from the accident had damaged his visual cortex. Technically, he was healthy, but his vision was gone and the chance of recovery was uncertain. The news was devastating. Lucas hadn't just lost his sight, he had lost the life he knew. Music, his identity, felt like an unattainable dream. He withdrew into himself, rejecting attempts from friends and family to help. His days were marked by monotony, each moment reinforcing the idea that his life was over. He could no longer play piano, walk independently, or see the world he loved so much. It was in this darkness that Clara first appeared. "Lucas, my name is Clara. I'll be your physical therapist." Her voice was calm, steady, yet filled with empathy. At first, Lucas didn't pay much attention. To him, nothing anyone said or did could change the fact that his life was ruined. But Clara was persistent. In the beginning, she only helped him with basic exercises, patiently guiding him as he learned to move without sight. But as the days passed, Lucas began to notice something different about her. Clara wasn't like the other professionals who treated him with pity. She believed in him, even when he had given up on himself. "You're still Lucas, and there's so much more to you than your eyes," she said one day after a particularly difficult session. He wanted to believe her, but the doubts were overwhelming. He was no longer the brilliant pianist, no longer the independent man who once walked with his head held high. He was just a fragment of who he had been. One day, Clara found him sitting on the couch, holding a crumpled sheet of music. He hadn't played piano since the accident, but kept that sheet as a reminder of what he had lost. "Do you still think about music?" she asked, sitting beside him. Lucas sighed, clutching the paper tightly. "I do, but it doesn't mean anything. How can I play without seeing? How can I be a blind musician?" Clara was silent for a moment, but Lucas could feel the intensity of her gaze. "Maybe that's what makes you even more special. Playing without sight, feeling the music in a way no one else can. Do you think it was your vision that made you a great pianist?" "No, Lucas. It was your soul, and that you still have." Her words hit him like lightning. No one had spoken about him with such conviction since the accident. For the first time, Lucas felt a small spark of hope. From that day on, Clara was more than just a physical therapist. She became a friend. She encouraged him to go outside, to explore the world through his other senses. Slowly, Lucas began to realize that while he couldn't see, there was still beauty in the world. The sound of leaves rustling in the wind, the aroma of fresh coffee, the warmth of the sun on his face. Most importantly, there was Clara. She didn't just guide him physically, but also emotionally. When he wanted to give up, she pulled him back. When he felt lost, she made him laugh. Clara became the lighthouse that illuminated Lucas's darkness. But there were still moments when despair crept in. One night, after a therapy session, Lucas opened up like never before. "Clara, sometimes I think it would be easier if I just weren't here." She stopped, surprised by Lucas's raw honesty. Then, with a firm voice, she replied, "Don't say that. You have so much to give, Lucas, and I'll be here to remind you of that until you see it for yourself." Lucas didn't respond, but her words stayed with him, like a melody that refused to fade away. Clara didn't know it then, but she had given Lucas something he hadn't felt since the accident. A reason to fight. The sound of leaves being carried by the wind filled the park, creating a calm melody Lucas had begun to recognize often. Clara walked beside him, gently holding his arm as she guided him. Since she insisted on getting him out of the house, those walks had become part of their routine. "The sky looks especially beautiful today," Clara said in her usual warm tone. "It's blue with a few scattered clouds." Lucas smiled. He couldn't see the sky, but he enjoyed hearing her describe it. Through her words, it felt like he could glimpse a piece of the world he'd lost. "And what do the clouds look like?" he asked, curious. "White, fluffy, like cotton candy." Clara laughed, giving his arm a light squeeze. "Do you really want to know, or are you just trying to distract me?" Lucas chuckled too. Maybe a little of both. Their friendship grew with each passing day, built on simple moments like that. Clara showed Lucas that the world wasn't as out of reach as he thought, teaching him to use his other senses to explore everything around him. But there was something else Lucas couldn't ignore. It wasn't just her guidance he relied on. He longed for her presence. She was his light, and he feared that without her, the darkness would return. One day, Clara showed up at Lucas's house with something special. "I have a surprise for you," she said excitedly, placing a portable keyboard on the table. Lucas raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" "Well, I know it's been a while since you've played, but I thought maybe you could give it a try today." He felt the keyboard under his fingers, and an invisible weight pressed on his chest. The piano had always been an extension of his soul, but since the accident, he had avoided it. The fear of not being good enough, of not finding the right notes without his sight, was paralyzing. "I don't know, Clara. It's been so long." She knelt beside him, gently holding his hand. "Lucas, the music is still inside you. You may have lost your sight, but what makes you an incredible musician has never disappeared. Just try." "For me?" He took a deep breath and let his fingers glide across the keys. The first notes were hesitant, almost clumsy, but then something magical happened. His muscles began to remember, and a gentle melody filled the air. Clara closed her eyes, immersed in the sound Lucas created. When he finished, the silence that followed was broken by the soft sound of Clara clapping. "That was beautiful, Lucas. I knew you could do it." He felt warmth spread through his chest. Clara had a way of making him believe in himself, even when doubts overwhelmed him. As the months went by, Lucas and Clara started sharing more moments together. They began taking daily walks in the park, where she described every detail around them. Sometimes she challenged him to guess what he was touching or smelling. It was a simple game, but for Lucas, every small victory was a reminder that he could still experience the world. One day, Clara brought him a set of Braille books. "I want you to read to me someday," she teased, handing him the first book. Lucas smiled, but the idea scared him. He wasn't sure he could do it. "Let's see if you still think I'm amazing after hearing my stuttering reading," he said, laughing. Clara laughed with him, but her response carried a deep emotion. "Lucas, nothing you do would ever change the way I feel about you." Those words stayed with him. However, Lucas began to notice something that unsettled him. He was falling in love with Clara. It wasn't just the way she made him smile or encouraged him to try again. It was everything about her, her kindness, her strength, the way she lit up even the darkest days. But along with that feeling came fear. What if she didn't feel the same way? Clara was everything he had, and the thought of losing her friendship terrified him. He preferred to bury his feelings rather than risk the precious bond they had built. That night, as she said goodbye, Lucas hesitated before wishing her good night. "Clara, thank you for everything you've done for me." She smiled, lightly touching his arm. "Always, Lucas." As she walked away, he stood there, reflecting. Even if he could never express how he felt, simply having her by his side was enough. Or at least he hoped it would be. The next day started like any other. Clara arrived early, as usual, with the contagious energy that made Lucas believe he could overcome anything. She organized the Braille books he was learning to read and adjusted the mobility cane he was still reluctant to use. But that day, something felt different. "You're unusually quiet," Lucas commented as he traced the edges of one of the books. "What's going on?" Clara hesitated for a moment, and he sensed the tension in the air before she even spoke. "I need to tell you something." Lucas sat up straighter, his heart already racing. "What is it?" Clara took a deep breath. "I received a job offer in another city. It's an incredible opportunity. A clinic specializing in sensory rehabilitation invited me to join their team." The silence that followed was so heavy that Clara almost wished she hadn't spoken. Lucas sat still, absorbing the news. The thought of Clara leaving felt like being hit by a cold wave. She was his rock, the light guiding him through the darkness. Without her, how would he move forward? "Oh," was all he managed to say, his voice quieter than he intended. "I haven't made a decision yet," Clara said quickly, trying to fill the void left by his words. "But I wanted to be honest with you, because this could change a lot of things." Lucas tried to swallow the lump in his throat. "It sounds like a great opportunity. You should go." The words came out, but they didn't feel true, not even to him. The hours that followed passed in a blur for Lucas. He tried to focus on anything else, but his thoughts kept circling back to Clara. He knew she deserved this opportunity, but the fear of losing her consumed him. By evening, as they walked together through the park, Lucas finally found the courage to speak. "Clara, what are you going to do?" She hesitated, but her response was honest. "I don't know. I really want this chance, but I also don't know if I want to leave all of this behind." Lucas knew that all of this meant him, but he wasn't sure if it was in the same way he wished. Doubt gnawed at his thoughts. He wanted to beg her to stay, but he also didn't want to be the reason that held her back. "And what do you feel?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. Clara stopped walking, and Lucas felt the air around them grow heavier. "Lucas, you're special to me, more than I can put into words. I never expected to meet someone like you when I started working here." Lucas's heart raced, but he also noticed the pain in her voice. "Then why hesitate?" he asked, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Because, Lucas, I don't want you to feel like I'm giving something up for you. This has to be my choice, and it has to be something I truly want." Her words were sincere, but they left Lucas even more torn. He wanted to tell Clara that he'd be lost without her, that every day with her was a gift, but the fear of seeming selfish held him back. That night, Lucas lay awake, replaying the conversation in his mind. He realized that if he didn't tell Clara how he felt, he might lose her anyway. But the thought of opening his heart scared him as much as the darkness he'd been living in. The next day, Clara arrived later than usual. Lucas tried to hide his anxiety, but his words gave him away. "I thought you weren't coming today. I had some things to take care of," she said, sounding a little nervous. As they spent another afternoon together, Clara was clearly distracted, and Lucas knew it was because of the decision she needed to make. By the end of the day, he finally gathered his courage. "Clara, can I invite you to a special dinner?" She smiled, surprised by his tone. "Dinner? What are you up to?" Lucas laughed nervously. "It's nothing fancy, but I want to thank you for everything you've done for me, and I want to talk." Clara hesitated, but the smile on her face softened any tension. "Of course, Lucas, I'd love to." As she left, Lucas felt a mix of relief and nervousness. He knew the dinner would be his chance to finally confess how he felt. But he also knew that once the words were spoken, there would be no going back. The table was set simply, but every detail seemed carefully chosen. A light tablecloth, 2 perfectly placed plates, and a single candle in the center gave the small dinner a warm, intimate feel. Lucas couldn't see the details, but he had supervised every choice, with Ethan's help to make sure it was perfect. Clara arrived right on time, the sound of her soft footsteps filling the room. "Wow, Lucas," she exclaimed, clearly impressed. "This is beautiful." He smiled nervously, feeling his face flush. "I did my best. I wanted it to be special." Clara gently touched his arm. "You succeeded." As they ate, they talked about simple things. Lucas's progress, their walks in the park, even the jokes Ethan always seemed to share. Clara was more relaxed than Lucas had expected, but he could still feel the weight of what he needed to say. When the meal was over, Clara looked at him curiously. "So, what's this all about? Don't get me wrong, I loved it, but it feels like there's something you want to tell me." Lucas took a deep breath. The moment had come. "Clara, you're right. There's something I need to say, and I didn't know how, so I thought a special dinner might be the best way." She tilted her head, encouraging him to continue. "From the day you came into my life, everything changed. At first, I thought you were just doing your job, but I soon realized it was more than that. You've helped me see the world in ways I never thought possible." Clara stayed quiet, but Lucas could feel the intensity in the air. "I'm not just grateful for everything you've done for me. Clara, I love you." The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Lucas clenched his hands under the table, nerves consuming him. Then Clara took his hand. "Lucas, I love you too." He froze, barely believing what he'd heard. "You love me?" She laughed, her voice full of emotion. "Of course I do, Lucas. I don't know how or when it happened, but being with you is the best part of my days." Lucas felt a wave of relief and joy wash over him. He laughed nervously, unable to contain his emotions. "I was so afraid you didn't feel the same." "I didn't have the courage to tell you," Clara interrupted. They spent the rest of the evening talking about everything they felt, as if an invisible weight had been lifted from both of them. For the first time, Lucas felt his life moving forward, with Clara by his side. Let's play a little game for anyone reading the comments. Type pizza in the comments, so only those who read this far will get it. Now, back to the story. As coffee was served, Clara decided to shift the conversation. "Lucas, now that we know we want to build something together, there's something important I want to talk about." He raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" "Have you ever thought about trying the experimental surgery they mentioned at the clinic?" Lucas remained silent for a moment. "I've thought about it, but what if it doesn't work? I don't know if I can handle another disappointment." Clara squeezed his hand, offering reassurance. "I know it's scary, but you're strong, Lucas. Even if it doesn't work, you've already shown you can live and thrive without your sight. And if it does work, just imagine everything you'll get to see again." Lucas knew she was right. The thought of regaining his vision was both terrifying and exciting. But with Clara by his side, he felt like he might be able to face this challenge. "Do you think I can do it?" he asked, his voice quiet. Clara smiled, though he couldn't see it. "I've always believed in you." Lucas took a deep breath. "All right, I'll try." He felt Clara's hand squeeze his again, an anchor amidst his doubts. That night, after Clara left, Lucas was alone, reflecting on what had just happened. He had confessed his love, and to his joy, Clara felt the same. But now, there was a new challenge ahead. As he lay down, a mix of hope and fear filled his mind. What if the surgery failed? What if things didn't go as planned? But deep down, he knew that with Clara by his side, he had a fighting chance. The next day, Lucas was sitting in a comfortable chair at the doctor's office, listening to the surgeon explain the details of the procedure. Every word carried a wave of anxiety. He already knew the surgery was experimental, and that success wasn't guaranteed. But hearing it out loud made the weight of the decision even heavier. Clara was beside him, as always. Her presence was comforting, though Lucas could sense she was worried too. "Lucas, we want to be clear. The surgery could restore partial or full vision, but there's also a chance it might not change anything. Are you prepared for that?" the doctor asked seriously. Lucas swallowed hard. He felt Clara's hand gently squeeze his, a silent message. "I'm here." "I am," Lucas replied, with more confidence than he felt. The days leading up to the surgery were a mix of hope and doubt. Clara was closer than ever, helping Lucas with each step. They spent hours together, organizing paperwork, attending pre-surgery exams, and talking about what might happen. "Lucas, are you really okay with this?" Clara asked one evening as they walked through the park. He took a deep breath, listening to the sound of leaves rustling in the wind. "I don't know, Clara. Part of me wants to believe it'll work, but another part is scared." "Scared of what?" He hesitated before answering. "Scared of seeing the world again and realizing it's not how I imagine it, and scared that you're not how I imagine." Clara stopped walking, surprised by Lucas's honesty. "Do you think seeing me will change how you feel about me?" "No," he answered quickly. "But what if I've created too perfect an image of you in my mind?" Clara let out a light laugh, breaking the tension. "Lucas, perfection is overrated. What matters is how we feel about each other, and that doesn't depend on what you see or don't see." He smiled, reaching for her arm. "You always know what to say." The night before the surgery, Clara decided to make something special. She brought fresh ingredients and improvised a dinner at Lucas's place. As she chopped vegetables, he listened to the sound of the knife against the cutting board, memorizing every movement like it was a melody. "You're so calm," he remarked, as Clara stirred something in a pot. "Someone has to be," she said, laughing. "If we both get anxious, we'll go crazy." After dinner, Clara sat beside Lucas on the couch. "Lucas, no matter what happens tomorrow, I want you to know that I'm proud of you." "Proud?" "Yes, for having the courage to try, even though you're scared. That's already a victory." Her words touched him deeply. In that moment, Lucas realized that no matter the outcome of the surgery, what truly mattered was that Clara was by his side, and he didn't want to spend a single day of his life without her. That night, while Clara organized hospital paperwork, Lucas felt an impulse he couldn't ignore. He knew there was no more time to waste. "Clara, can you stop for a moment?" She looked up, curious. "What is it?" Lucas approached her, reaching for her hand. "There's something I need to tell you." "You're scaring me," she joked, trying to lighten the mood. Lucas smiled, but his tone was serious. "I don't know what tomorrow will bring. Maybe I'll see the world again, or maybe everything will stay the same. But one thing I'm certain of, no matter what happens, I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Clara was silent, her eyes filled with emotion. "Lucas," he held her hand, his voice trembling with feeling. "Clara, will you marry me?" For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Then Clara broke into a wide smile, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Lucas, of course I will." He exhaled the breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. As she hugged him, he felt a mix of relief and happiness like never before. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For being my light when everything felt lost." The next morning, as Clara helped him get ready for the hospital, Lucas felt calmer than he'd expected. He knew a bright future awaited him, no matter the outcome of the surgery. "Are you ready for this?" Clara asked, holding his hand. "Ready, because with you, I can face anything." The operating room was quiet, save for the rhythmic sounds of the equipment around him. Lucas lay on the table, his heart racing, feeling the cool grip of Clara's hands holding his tightly. She had been by his side through every step, and now her firm grip felt like a lifeline. "It's going to be okay," she said softly, her voice a steady anchor for Lucas's storm of emotions. He took a deep breath and gave a faint smile, more for her reassurance than his own. Within minutes, the anesthetics began to take effect and the darkness consumed him once again. When Lucas opened his eyes, nothing had changed. He blinked several times, but everything around him remained a vast emptiness. The doctor stood beside him, monitoring his initial recovery. "Lucas, the surgery was technically successful. Now we wait. Your brain will need time to process the changes and possibly reconnect the visual pathways." Lucas nodded, trying to absorb the doctor's words. It was as he had feared. There were no guarantees. "How long?" Clara asked, breaking the silence. "It's hard to say. It could be days, weeks, or even months. But I want you both to focus on any small signs. Even the slightest change will be a good indicator." Clara thanked the doctor and helped Lucas to his feet. As he leaned on her to leave the hospital, the weight of uncertainty hung in the air. The days that followed were a test of patience and resilience. Lucas spent hours sitting by the window, straining to perceive any change, any faint glimmer or shadow. He knew he shouldn't expect immediate results, but the waiting was suffocating. Clara stayed by his side, encouraging him with kind words. She tried to distract him with conversations, readings, and even playful moments to lighten the mood, but Lucas knew she was just as anxious as he was. "Have you noticed anything?" she asked one morning while preparing coffee in the kitchen. Lucas shook his head, frustrated. "Nothing. It's like nothing has changed." Clara walked over, taking his hands firmly in hers. "Don't give up, Lucas. Remember, the doctor said it could take time. And even if it takes longer, we'll face it together." He nodded, grateful for her support, but the doubt still gnawed at him. One night, lying in bed, Lucas reflected on how his life had changed since meeting Clara. He still couldn't see the world, but she had shown him light in ways he'd never imagined. She had taught him to feel the beauty around him, to hear the sound of trees swaying in the wind, to sense the warmth of the sun on his skin. "Even if I never see again, I already have enough," he thought. But deep down, the hope still burned within him. The next morning, Clara suggested a walk in the park. "I think we need some fresh air," she said, pulling Lucas by the hand. He grumbled but eventually gave in. Being outdoors always helped him clear his mind. As they walked, Clara described the flowers starting to bloom and the clear, cloudless blue sky. Lucas listened intently, but his attention was focused on something else. He felt something different, almost imperceptible. "Clara, wait." She stopped immediately, concerned. "What is it?" Lucas stayed silent. Furrowing his brows, he tried to process what he was feeling. I think I saw something." Clara held her breath. "What did you see?" "I'm not sure. It's not clear, but I think I noticed something, like a change in the light." He tilted his face toward the sky, where the sun shone brightly. For the first time in years, he felt as though something was piercing through the darkness. It wasn't clear vision, but a distinction between light and shadow, something that had once seemed impossible. Clara held his arms tightly, overwhelmed with emotion. "This is incredible, Lucas. It's a start." "Is it?" he asked, still uncertain. "Of course it is," Clara replied, her excitement clear in her voice. "Let's tell the doctor and keep believing." Lucas smiled, feeling a small spark of hope reignite within him. It might have been faint, but to him, it was enough to keep trying. Days later, the wedding day had arrived, and Lucas woke up early, his mind filled with conflicting emotions. Anxiety, happiness, and above all, a sense of surrealism accompanied him. He was about to marry Clara, the woman who had brought light into his life even in the darkest moments. Ethan, his best man, walked into the room and gave him a light pat on the shoulder. "Ready for the big day, man?" Lucas chuckled nervously. "Ready or not, it looks like it's here." Ethan pulled up a chair and sat beside him. "Clara is amazing, you know that. And you deserve to be happy, Lucas. Don't let the nerves ruin this moment." Lucas nodded. He knew Ethan was right. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. Hours later, Lucas stood at the altar, his heart racing. The garden was adorned with white and lilac flowers, and a soft fragrance lingered in the air. The sound of quiet laughter from the guests and the rustling of clothes created an atmosphere of anticipation. "Everything okay?" Ethan asked, standing beside him. "I think so. Just nervous." "That's normal. Once Clara walks in, all the nerves will disappear." Lucas tried to smile, but the weight of the moment made his hands sweat. He adjusted his tie for the third time, feeling his heartbeat echo in his ears. Then, the music changed. The first notes of the wedding march filled the air, and silence fell over the crowd. Lucas felt the atmosphere shift, as if everyone held their breath at the same time. He knew Clara was about to enter, and that's when it happened. Lucas felt something different. A flash of light crossed his mind, like a small lightning bolt in the darkness. He blinked, confused. Another flash, this time stronger. He held his breath as a strange, almost magical sensation washed over him. "Lucas, are you okay?" Ethan asked, noticing the tense expression on his friend's face. "I think I'm seeing something," Lucas replied, his voice low, almost incredulous. As Clara walked down the aisle, the flashes became more frequent. At first, they were just blurs of light. Then vague shapes started to take form. Finally, he saw. Clara's white dress seemed to float around her, her hair elegantly pinned and adorned with small flowers. Her smile was radiant, and Lucas felt the world pause as he watched her. Tears began to roll down his cheeks before he could stop them. Noticing something was different, Clara paused for a moment, concerned. "Lucas?" she whispered as she slowly approached the altar. He couldn't respond. He just stood there, unable to believe what was happening. When Clara finally reached the altar, she held Lucas's hands and noticed the tears streaming down his face. "Lucas, what is it?" He lifted his eyes to hers, still struggling to process it all. "Clara, I can see you," she gasped, shock evident on her face. Clara brought her hand to her face, disbelief mingling with joy as tears fell freely. "You're seeing me?" Lucas nodded, overcome with emotion. "Yes, you're more beautiful than I could have ever imagined." He raised his hand to touch her face, gently tracing her features as if to match the image he was seeing with what he had felt so many times before. "I always knew you were special, Clara, but now I see just how much." She laughed through her tears, gripping his hands tightly. "This is a miracle, Lucas." "No," he corrected her with a smile. "The miracle is you." The officiant, clearly moved, stepped forward. "My friends, I believe we're witnessing something extraordinary today. Let's continue with this celebration, as it's clear this marriage has been blessed in ways we couldn't have imagined." The guests erupted into applause as Lucas and Clara remained locked in each other's gaze, taking in the moment. "Clara," Lucas began, his voice steady despite the emotion. "Today is more than just the day we become husband and wife. Today is the day you gave me a new life." "Lucas, you are my life," Clara replied, holding his hands tightly. With a smile, the officiant proceeded with the rest of the ceremony. Every word seemed to carry even deeper meaning. When Lucas and Clara exchanged their vows, there wasn't a dry eye in the garden. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Lucas gently cupped Clara's face with both hands, pulling her into a passionate kiss as the guests erupted in applause for the couple. After the ceremony, Lucas and Clara strolled through the garden while the guests followed them toward the reception. Lucas was still adjusting to his vision, blinking often as the colors and shapes around him seemed to grow clearer with each passing moment. During this brief walk, something struck him like a bolt of lightning. He stopped suddenly, grabbing Clara's arm. "What is it?" she asked, concerned. Lucas stayed quiet for a moment, processing the memory that had just surfaced. "Before the accident, I used to go to a cafe near the conservatory where I taught. There was this woman who walked by every day at the same time." Clara furrowed her brow, unsure where he was going with this. "I always wanted to talk to her, but never found the courage. She was stunning." Clara smiled shyly, starting to understand what Lucas was implying. "And you think that woman was me?" Lucas stepped back, studying her closely. "I'm sure it was you. Your smile, the way you walk, it's you." Clara covered her mouth with her hands, shocked. "Lucas, Fate had already brought us together, Clara. We just needed a reason to finally meet." She laughed softly, still processing the revelation. "And what a reason it was, huh? It doesn't matter how it happened. What matters is that we're here now." They embraced, both feeling the weight of everything they had gone through to arrive at that moment. At the reception, the guests were thrilled. The wedding was already a memorable event, but Lucas's miracle had turned the day into something extraordinary. As they danced for the first time as husband and wife, Lucas leaned in to whisper in Clara's ear, I'll never lose sight of what matters most, with or without vision. You're everything to me." She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "And you're everything to me." The reception continued into the night with laughter, dancing, and unforgettable moments. Lucas felt like he was living a dream. Even though his vision wasn't fully restored, he marveled at every detail he could make out. The soft lights illuminating the garden, the smiles of friends and family, and most of all, Clara. She seemed to radiate energy that filled the entire space. Every step she took, Lucas watched her, still amazed by the intensity of his feelings for her. More than ever, he knew his life had a new purpose. During the final dance of the evening, Clara rested her head on Lucas's shoulder. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. "Better than I ever thought possible," he replied, kissing the top of her head. The next morning, Lucas woke up to sunlight streaming through the window. He blinked, adjusting his vision, which seemed slightly sharper. Turning to his side, he saw Clara sleeping beside him, her breathing calm and her hair spread across the pillow. He reached out, gently touching her face. It was a simple sight, but one that carried profound meaning for him. Clara slowly opened her eyes and smiled, seeing him so close. "Good morning, husband," Lucas chuckled. "Good morning, wife." They stayed quiet for a few moments, just enjoying each other's presence. Then Clara broke the silence. "Do you think it was fate that brought us here?" Lucas thought for a moment before answering. "I think fate gave us a chance, but it was up to us to take it." She smiled, squeezing his hand. "Then let's keep making the most of it." In the days that followed, Lucas began to notice more significant improvements in his vision. He still had to focus to pick out details, but the colors and shapes around him felt more vivid than ever. During a follow-up appointment with the doctor, he shared his excitement. "I'm starting to see more, doctor. It's not perfect, but it's so much more than I ever expected." The doctor smiled, clearly pleased with the progress. "That's an excellent sign, Lucas. Your recovery is going very well. Keep stimulating your vision and following the care routine." Clara, seated next to him, squeezed his hand tightly. "I knew you'd get there." Lucas smiled back, though something still weighed on his mind. He didn't know how far his recovery would go. Even so, he decided not to let uncertainty cloud his future with Clara. One afternoon, while Clara was preparing dinner, Lucas sat at the piano for the first time in months. He played a few notes, his fingers hesitant at first, but soon he found a melody that seemed to capture exactly how he felt. Clara stepped into the room, drying her hands on a towel, and stopped when she heard the music. "That's beautiful, Lucas." He turned his face toward her voice. "You are my inspiration." She smiled, touched, and sat beside him on the piano bench. "So how about a duet?" Lucas chuckled. "Only if you promise not to leave me behind." They played together, laughing and improvising as music filled the house. It was a simple moment, yet it symbolized everything they had accomplished together. There were still challenges ahead. Lucas knew his vision might never fully return, but he also knew that life with Clara was a miracle in itself. Each day was an opportunity to discover something new, to create memories, and to face the world with courage and love. Days later, as the sun began to set, Clara walked into the house, bringing an energy that seemed to light up the room. Lucas was sitting on the couch with a Braille book open on his lap, but looked up as soon as he heard her footsteps. "So how was the meeting?" he asked, placing a bookmark in the book. Clara sighed but smiled. "Intense, as always. But I think we got everything aligned. So we're ready to start." She sat beside him and took his hand. "We're more than ready, Lucas. Our nonprofit is going to change lives, just like ours did." Lucas felt warmth filling his chest. The idea of starting an organization to help people with visual impairments had come up months before, during a casual conversation about how they could make a difference. Lucas wanted others to find the same strength and hope Clara had given him. The first official meeting took place in their makeshift home office. Clara was excited, holding a stack of notes, while Lucas listened closely. "The proposal is simple but powerful. We'll create programs to teach visually impaired individuals how to be independent. And I also want them to learn to see the world differently, through their other senses," Clara explained, gesturing as she spoke. Lucas nodded. "I want to include music. When I lost my sight, music kept me connected to the world. I think it could be transformative for others too." Clara smiled and gently cupped his face. You always have the best ideas. I just want to give back what I received from you. They exchanged a deep look, and Clara leaned in to kiss him. The touch was full of tenderness and promises of a bright future. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activities. Clara dove into logistics while Lucas worked on program content. They spent late nights planning, brainstorming ideas, and refining details. One evening, while they were in the office, Clara pulled out a notebook and started sketching something. What are you doing? Lucas asked, curious. Sketching the logo for our nonprofit. I think it should symbolize how light can break through darkness. Something like a sunrise? He suggested. She smiled. Exactly. Together, they worked on the design, each contributing their unique perspective. The result was a simple yet meaningful logo, a circle representing the sun, with rays extending outward in all directions, symbolizing the infinite possibilities they wanted to offer others. On the day of the inauguration, Clara and Lucas were nervous but filled with anticipation. The event took place at a community center, with dozens of people in attendance, including friends, family, and future beneficiaries. Lucas stepped onto the stage, holding a microphone. He took a deep breath before speaking. 2 years ago, my life was engulfed in darkness. I couldn't imagine a future for myself. But then, an incredible person came into my life and showed me that light can take many forms. He looked toward Clara, sitting in the front row, her eyes shining with emotion. Today, I want everyone here to know that even in the toughest moments, there is a way to find hope. And our nonprofit is here for that, to help you discover a world full of possibilities. The applause was warm, and Lucas felt that this was just the beginning of something extraordinary. In the months that followed, the nonprofit grew quickly. They offered orientation and mobility classes, sensory workshops, music lessons, and even emotional support sessions. Clara was tireless, coordinating teams, while Lucas dedicated himself to the participants, sharing his personal experiences and demonstrating that independence was possible. One day, during a visit to one of the workshops, Clara pulled Lucas aside. I have a surprise for you. Another one? You're full of surprises lately. She laughed and led him to a room where a group was sitting in a circle, listening attentively. In the center, there was a piano. They want to hear you play, Clara said with a smile. Lucas hesitated, but the encouragement in Clara's eyes convinced him. He sat down at the piano and let his fingers glide over the keys. The piece he played was his own composition, something he had created after the surgery. When he finished, the room burst into applause. Lucas felt tears welling up in his eyes. This is what I want to do here, he said, looking at Clara. I want to inspire people, the way you've inspired me. Despite their busy schedules, Clara and Lucas always made time for each other. One evening, they decided to do something special and returned to the park where they used to walk during the early months after the accident. As they strolled, Clara took his hand. Do you remember when you told me you were afraid I wouldn't be what you imagined? Lucas laughed, looking at her with tenderness. I couldn't have been more wrong. You're better than I could have ever imagined. They stopped at a bench, watching the sunset. With his partially restored vision, Lucas admired the blend of colors in the sky. Thank you for never giving up on me, Clara. I'd never give up on you. You're my light too, Lucas. They kissed, a gesture that seemed to hold all the promises they had made to each other. As the nonprofit continued to grow, Clara and Lucas realized they were creating something bigger than they had ever dreamed of. They weren't just helping people with visual impairments. They were building a community, a space where hope and love were just as important as the skills being taught. One night, while reviewing reports in the office, Clara closed her laptop and looked at Lucas. Lucas, have you ever realized that all of this happened because you had the courage to try? He smiled, taking her hand. It wasn't just my courage, it was the love you brought into my life. They embraced, both feeling that they were exactly where they were meant to be. The nonprofit's growth brought achievements Clara and Lucas had never imagined, but also introduced challenges that tested their strength and partnership. With the main office running at full capacity, they began working on opening branches in nearby cities, driven by the desire to bring hope to more people. One morning, as Clara made coffee, Lucas walked into the kitchen holding a letter and smiling. "I just got something you'll want to hear," he said, sitting at the table. Clara looked up, curious. "What is it?" "It's from a young woman named Sophia, 19 years old. She wrote to say that thanks to the mobility course at our nonprofit, she was able to go to her university on her own and start studying psychology." Clara placed her hands over her heart, deeply moved. "That's incredible, Lucas. It's exactly the kind of impact we dreamed of making." Lucas nodded. "Every story like this reminds me why we started this in the first place." With the nonprofit gaining visibility, they were invited to a social leadership conference. Clara was excited, while Lucas seemed thoughtful. "Do you think we're ready to expand this much?" he asked over breakfast. "Lucas, we'll never be completely ready. But if we don't try, how will we know how far we can go?" He smiled, admiring the determination in her eyes. "You're right, and with you by my side, I think we can do anything." At the event, Clara and Lucas took the stage to share their story. Clara began by explaining how the nonprofit was born out of a challenging time and grew thanks to their desire to change lives. When Lucas took the microphone, the audience was fully engaged. "My vision may not be perfect," he said, "but I've learned to see what truly matters. And that goes beyond what the eyes can perceive. The greatest lesson I've learned is that with love, courage, and support, anyone can overcome challenges." The applause was so overwhelming that Lucas had to pause before continuing. "We're not just here to teach independence. We're here to show that life is full of possibilities, even in the darkest moments." After their presentation, many people approached them to congratulate them and discuss potential partnerships. Clara and Lucas knew this was another door opening for them. Back in their city, Clara surprised Lucas with a new idea. "What if we add something more to the nonprofit, something that goes beyond classes and workshops?" "What are you thinking?" "A community center, a space where people can meet, share experiences, and form connections." Lucas smiled. "I love the idea. Let's do it." They began planning the center, which would include a music room, a braille library, and an event space. Clara was so excited that she spent nights sketching out the layout. "You know this is going to be a lot of work, right?" Lucas teased as he watched her draw lines on a large sheet of paper. "I know, but I also know it's worth it." He leaned in and kissed her forehead. "It's always worth it, as long as we're together." Between meetings, renovations, and new ideas, Clara and Lucas always found moments to connect. One evening, they decided to cook together, turning the kitchen into a battlefield full of laughter and flowers scattered everywhere. "You're ruining this recipe, Lucas," Clara teased, trying to save the dough he was awkwardly mixing. "Hey, at least I'm trying. And for your information, I make the best sauce ever." She laughed, tossing a bit of flour at him. "I think you're exaggerating, but I'd love to taste it." They ended the night dining by candlelight, sharing stories and laughter, reminding themselves that, despite all the challenges, the foundation of everything they did was the love they had for each other. When the community center finally opened, Clara and Lucas couldn't hold back their emotions. People of all ages were there, exploring the new spaces and sharing stories. Lucas wandered into the music room, where a group of young people was playing instruments. A boy named Miguel, who had recently lost his sight, caught his attention. "Do you play piano?" Miguel asked shyly. "I do, but I think you could play even better. Want to give it a try?" Miguel nodded, and Lucas guided him to the piano. As the boy played his first notes, Lucas felt a wave of pride and gratitude. "You're doing great, Miguel. Keep going, and soon you'll be playing amazing music." Clara appeared at the door, watching with a smile on her face. "You're amazing with them, Lucas. I'm just trying to give back everything I've received." In the following months, the nonprofit continued to grow, and the impact Clara and Lucas were making was immense. But with growth came new challenges, including financial pressure and the struggle to balance their personal and professional lives. Let's have some fun with those who only read the comments. Type milkshake in the comments. Only those who made it this far will get it. Now, let's continue the story. One night while reviewing reports, Clara paused and looked at Lucas. "Do you think we're going too fast?" He thought for a moment before answering. "Maybe, but I think it's because we want to do everything at once. We need to remember to slow down when we need to." Clara nodded, touched by his wisdom. And we also need to remember to take care of ourselves. In that moment, they decided to dedicate more time to each other, making sure work didn't completely consume them. The morning arrived with a clear sky, and Clara felt a different energy in the air. After months of intense work at the nonprofit, she and Lucas had finally decided to take some time for themselves. It wasn't just a break, but an opportunity to reconnect away from daily responsibilities. "So, where are we going?" Clara asked as she put her suitcase in the car. Lucas smiled mysteriously. "You'll find out when we get there." She rolled her eyes, but her curiosity was evident. "You love keeping secrets, don't you? Only when I know the secret will make you even more excited." The trip began with soft music filling the car as they drove through roads lined with green fields and distant mountains. Clara gazed out the window, lost in thought, while Lucas maintained a serene expression behind the wheel. After a few hours, Clara saw the ocean appear on the horizon, blue and shimmering under the sun. "A beach?" she asked, her voice full of surprise. Lucas parked the car in front of a small, rustic cabin surrounded by palm trees with a direct view of the ocean. "It's not just a beach, it's our beach for a few days." Clara stepped out of the car and looked around, amazed. "Lucas, this is perfect." He took her hand, smiling. "I knew you'd love it." The days at the cabin were filled with simple yet meaningful moments. They walked on the sand, laughed while building sandcastles that the waves quickly destroyed, and even ventured on a sunset boat ride. One night, while dining under the stars, Lucas held Clara's hand and looked at her with a serious expression. "You know, Clara, these days have made me realize even more how much you mean to me." She smiled, but his tone made her curious. "What's on your mind, Lucas?" He took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "I just want you to know that no matter what happens, I'm here. You are the reason for everything we do. And if we have something so beautiful in our lives today, it's because you never gave up on me." Tears welled up in Clara's eyes. "And I never will, Lucas. You mean everything to me." They embraced under the starry sky, the sound of the waves in the background, creating the perfect soundtrack for the moment. The next morning, as they had coffee on the porch, Clara started feeling a little dizzy. She tried to brush it off, but Lucas noticed immediately. "Are you okay?" he asked, setting his cup down and leaning toward her. "I'm fine, just a bit dizzy, nothing serious." But Lucas wasn't convinced. "Clara, if something's wrong, we need to check it out," she sighed, trying not to worry. "Maybe it's just exhaustion." Back in the city, Clara continued experiencing mild morning sickness. After days of insisting she was fine, she decided to take a test. That morning, while Lucas was at a meeting at the nonprofit, Clara found herself alone in the bathroom, holding the pregnancy test. When the positive line appeared, it felt like the world stood still for a moment. A wave of emotion washed over her, and tears streamed down her face. "I'm going to be a mom," she murmured, her voice filled with joy and surprise. She knew she had to tell Lucas in a special way. That evening, Clara prepared a dinner on the porch, decorating the space with candles and flowers. When Lucas arrived, he immediately noticed something was different. "What's going on?" he asked as he sat at the table. Clara smiled, trying to hide her nervous excitement. "I just wanted to do something special for you." As they ate, Lucas looked at her curiously. "Clara, you're hiding something from me. What is it?" She laughed nervously and then stood up, handing him a small package. "I want you to open this." Lucas unwrapped the gift and found a tiny pair of baby shoes. He stayed silent for a moment, processing what he was seeing. "Does this mean what I think it means?" he asked, his voice trembling. Clara nodded, smiling as tears streamed down her face. "We're having a baby, Lucas." He stood up, overwhelmed with emotion. "A baby." He pulled Clara into a tight hug. "This is amazing, Clara," Lucas said, holding her face in his hands. "And this baby will be the greatest blessing of our lives." She laughed and cried at the same time, her heart overflowing with happiness. "I knew you'd be thrilled." Lucas cupped her face and looked into her eyes. "Thrilled? Clara, I never imagined I could feel this complete." They stayed in each other's arms for several minutes, the future feeling full of promise and possibilities. In the following days, Lucas made sure to take care of Clara in every way. He researched pregnancy, insisted she rest more, and started thinking about how to prepare the house for the baby's arrival. One afternoon, as they painted the baby's future room, Clara laughed at Lucas, trying to choose between two shades of yellow. "Lucas, you're taking this way too seriously." "Of course I am. This is our baby's first room. It has to be perfect." She walked up behind him, wrapping her arms around him. "It's already perfect, because you're doing it with so much love." Lucas turned around and kissed her gently. "Everything I do is for the two of you." Finally, the big day arrived. Clara gave birth to a healthy baby girl they named Sophia. When Lucas held their daughter for the first time, he was overwhelmed by an indescribable emotion. "Clara, she's perfect. Just like her father," Clara replied with a tired but loving smile. Lucas looked at Sophia, her tiny eyes blinking curiously at him. "I promise to be the best dad I can be, Sophia, and I'll always remember that it all started with the love your mom gave me." Clara watched the scene with tears in her eyes, feeling that their family was complete. In the years that followed, Lucas and Clara's lives were filled with challenges and joys, but the love between them remained the foundation of everything. The nonprofit thrived, helping thousands of people, while little Sophia grew up surrounded by love and inspiration. One evening, as they walked through the park with Sophia in Lucas's arms, Clara looked at him and smiled. "Do you still think you wouldn't have the courage to live in the dark?" He laughed, kissing her forehead. "Now I know I was never in the dark, because you've always been my light." What did you think of Lucas and Sophia's story? Share your thoughts in the comments. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What's your score? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to keep up with all our stories. And be sure to check out more heartwarming stories by clicking here on the end screen.